Welcome once again to another awesome episode of the FLAMA podcast, the ultimate guide to the gaming industry. I am your host, Hell, and today we have a very awesome guest. Jordan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Awesome. Jordan, so I wanted to talk about game design specifically. I heard to get in the industry as a game designer is difficult. I heard it's very competitive. Is this accurate?
Absolutely. It seems that the industry has become so popular, especially among students and those wanting to get into the industry. Game design is such a broad field that it catches a lot of people that are interested in the discipline bucket. And so it can be very competitive to try and land some of those design jobs because everyone seems to be, interested in design in one way or another. But there are also so many sub-disciplines within design that it's sometimes difficult to find your niche or land that job where they're looking for a very specific skill set.
Gotcha. Do you feel like people are usually more specialists when it comes to game design, or they take the generalist approach? Which one is more like prevalent in the industry?
I would say most successful do specialize and they find and carve that niche for themselves, whether that be in narrative space, where they have more of like a writing background, or like audio design, even, which takes like audio engineering background skills, or you have some more of the traditional like level and world design roles, or like AI design, systems design, even like you mentioned earlier when we were chatting, like lore design, which is more like narrative design.
Right.
But these very specialized roles that vary from studio to studio.
Hmm.
It's kind of fun to see how different studios name the same role, but they have their own little spin on it.
Interesting. And earlier we were talking about a reward designer, which just it blew my mind. There's something like that. That's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. When I worked at Blizzard on World of Warcraft, like reward designers were very integral into that space because one of those intrinsic motivations for players a lot of the time, especially in games like MMOs, is like, what are the rewards behind these activities that you're doing or these experiences that you're having in the game? And that requires a lot of thought, a lot of design behind all of that. So definitely a very real space that requires a lot of like math skills even
Right.
in that space.
That is very interesting. Let's backtrack a little bit. So when it comes to game design, what exactly is game design?
At its core, game design, to me at least, is the act of finding the fun, chasing the fun, and then curating an experience for others to also experience that fun that you're aiming for. Whether that be through a narrative story, whether that be through going through like a level or a world experience, or fighting some kind of enemy combatant, or a system that they engage with. Like, I think of something like Civilization, which is just nothing but systems upon systems that actually all come together to form this experience of you controlling a civilization and advancing. But really, it's just a bunch of systems layered on top of each other. And so, whatever approach you take, you're trying to find this fun experience and you're curating it so that others can enjoy it as well. And that's,
Gotcha.
to me, what game design is at its heart.
Gotcha. Okay, so basically making it fun and oh, gotcha. How do you make something fun? I feel like fun is something very subjective, but at the same
It
time, there's
is,
like a psychological background of what.
absolutely. And there's multiple frameworks that all try and put this label on like what is,
Yeah.
and not to like sing the SpongeBob F is for Friends song, right? But like as you said, fun can be very subjective, and there are a lot of different motivations that people have behind playing games. Some of them might be, I find it really fun to collect things, or I find it really fun to be a social experience for me. And other people find competitive experiences to be very fun. So it does vary from player to player, and different genres lend to those different motivations better in different ways. Like an MMO, a social fun motivation there is very encompassing in that experience. Whereas, like say, like a first person shooter, like Counter Strike, like a
Mm,
competitive is right there at the forefront. Um, and then compared to something like I don't know, Pokemon Go, or like those gotcha games where you can like collect just massive collection of all kinds of different things, appeal to different types of people. So really, you find what you think is going to be fun for your game, and that's what you chase after based on like those motivations and those kind of gameplay loops that you find fun, and that's what you build
gotcha.
experiences to kind of channel that type of motivation.
Awesome. Okay, so there's definitely, as we mentioned before, a subjective aspect of fun, but there's also systems and rewards and things that help people feel that fun in the game.
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
Absolutely. Right. And then there's this thought or concept of flow, right, where like difficulty and your experience and you want to have some kind of happy medium there where you're kind of losing yourself in the experience, and that's really like the sweet spot. And these are ideas that are tried and true and have exist not just in video game design, but lots of different types of experiences. But it really is no different. It's just the medium that we are using to create these experiences for people is
Exactly.
video games.
Exactly. In your experience, let's say someone is making a video game, how early should these discussions need to take place? These discussions about fun and systems, how early should they be had?
Well, the earlier you can find the fun, the better, because that is the most important thing that will kind of be your guiding star as you go throughout this development process. Because you could have this really cool idea, this cool story, or this cool like system, or this like mechanic that you really want to do, but if you don't know what is going to be fun, like that core gameplay loop essentially is going to be, you're going to be all over the place when it comes to like actually implementing these ideas, because you'll be left with a game that like has pieces of a game that you would think
Yeah.
belong there, but there's no real core experience that is keeping the player along that journey.
Gotcha. Yeah, so the earlier the better for sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, 100%. Jordan, how did you get started in the industry? Did you study game
Right.
design? Like how
Yeah.
was your how did you start?
So in school, I first was studying electrical engineering. I thought I wanted to be an engineer of that kind. And then I discovered there was a game development program at the University of Utah. So I kind of shifted gears, changed my major to be more computer science focused, and studied in what was called the Entertainment Arts and Engineering program there at the University of Utah. It's now called like the Division of Games, like they've kind of changed how it's categorized, but it's essentially the same thing there. And they had a master's program, and then they also had an undergrad program that became available right before I graduated. So I was able to graduate with
Oh,
that actual specific degree. So they have a what's called a Bachelor of Science in Games. So that's what my degree ended up being. So I studied there, graduated with my degree, and then I eventually, after much effort and time and applying and all of that, I landed my first real industry job at Blizzard, working as a QA analyst on their UX team, or the user experience team, working with the raids and the dungeons designer teams there on World of Warcraft. That was really kind of my first main industry job, and it took me several years of applying and trying for different positions and different roles and networking with people, and have several friends that I had met through playing World of Warcraft that I just came to find out also worked at Blizzard, and so over time networked with them and was able to get some internal referrals, which certainly help. But at the end of the day, you got to land the interview. You got to have the skills to back up the role that you're applying for. But definitely helped.
Gotcha. How was it for you going for a very big WoW fan to working at Blizzard? How did that feel like?
Oh, I loved it. I still cherish the time I spent there, and I made many friends that I still am in contact with, former coworkers there, and so it was a lot of fun working on that game. Especially, coming as a player, it was very important in that role specifically because it's like one of the few roles where they require you to be like a mythic raider and have that experience already, because you have to be testing that level of content, and you can teach a lot of skills, you can teach tool sets and things like that, but it's a lot harder to take someone who hasn't played the game at that level and get them caught up to speed, that like in a cadence that where they can be a contributing member on the team. So they kind of set that bar of like must have mythic raid experience. So it was cool to just come in and be able to like have my player hat and also have my dev hat and be able to like switch it on and off, or sometimes just have it on both on at the same time, depending on
Right.
what we were doing.
Exactly. It definitely gave you a deeper level of empathy for the player, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's so important. Every studio I've worked at emphasize that it's important to play your game.
Hmm.
And so when players say, the devs don't even play their own game, it's a lie. It's absolutely a lie. They play their games. They love and are passionate about their games. Otherwise, how are you supposed to know like what's important? What do players value in your games if you're not playing them yourself? It doesn't mean the devs are the best at the games. Like usually far from it, because they're spending so much time building out the games,
Exactly.
building out these experiences. They may not have as much time to become a master at like
Get
this
good,
one
right?
area of the game, but they certainly know and understand what's important in these games, and are very familiar with what's going on.
Perfect. Regarding technical skills, so you went out there, you networked, you got referrals. Regarding technical skills, what were the technical skills that helped you get that job at Blizzard?
Right. So before I worked at Blizzard, I actually had decided I was going to take maybe a bit more of a traditional software development route and just get more experience with programming. And so I worked for a couple of years as just like a software developer for a company that did print streams, essentially taking in data, creating documents, and then printing those documents. So I did application development for them, scripting in mostly like Python, and working in these giant XML files that drove these print streams. And so being able to just have scripting experience, programming experience for the plus plus, C sharp. The language is not so important as it is the skill set of being able to take an idea and implement it in a programming language of your choice. Like scripting, especially, is very valuable in design because basically every industry level engine I know of uses some level of programming or scripting to drive those design experiences, whether that's Unreal with their blueprints that integrates with C++, or other game engines that are more like Python looking, or you have things like Lua on WoW. They had a lot of like Lua scripting, which is very common there. And even just like modding is a great way to get into that kind of like experience for yourself, if you're passionate about a game and you want to try your hand at like how would I program for this game. If there's a modding community, like that's exactly how you get into that, is just learn what the other modders are doing, and it has to interface with the game somehow, and it communicates through that same code base, more or less. This isn't going to turn into like a modding podcast episode, but like that's a good way to get your feet wet of like, how does programming in this game work? Like, maybe try and learn how some of the mods that people make for it work, and go from there.
Yeah, exactly. When it comes to programming, as long as you understand the underlying logic of how to program something, language is kind of irrelevant. You have to learn some new
Yeah,
things, but
like, don't get me wrong, there are some core languages that are definitely valuable to learn, and are most common and prevalent in game development. Like,
right.
tools are most often written in like C#, in my experience. The engines are most often written in C, and scripting is mostly in more of those scripting languages like Python. So I just use those as examples of like, these are very commonplace. It's not like a hard and fast rule that they'll always be the case. But if you want to learn a specific language for a specific skill set, and you want to like specialize in tools or engine or scripting specifically for like designing, Python's a great place to start. Plus is also a great place to start, and same with C#. So it just depends on like, what is it you want to do? What is it you want to specialize in? Because a designer that understands and is proficient in scripting in one language or another is going to be infinitely more valuable than someone who's like, I have cool ideas and I can prototype them on paper. That's great. How do we get them in a video game that is using these technologies to actually implement them? Because if you want to be a board game designer, great. You probably don't need these
C++.
technical skill sets of like programming as much. But if you want to be a video game designer, you certainly need to at least have some base experience and skill set there. So I would very highly emphasize, like, just pick something, and you know, as Miss Frizzle used to say, get messy, make mistakes. Like, it's okay. Just get in there and do it.
Exactly. How rare is it for a game designer to have technical skills? Is that pretty rare?
I say it's rare, but the most successful ones certainly do have those technical skill sets, because especially like if you're applying for a job, it will make you much more attractive as a candidate, because then they don't have to teach you those things. They don't have to teach you that base skill set. You may be stepping into a more proprietary engine where they do things differently with a different internal language or whatever, but that's fine. They expect to be able to have to like teach you those things, because no one applies at Blizzard and puts on the resume, I understand the Blizzard code base, because they have a different version of like the C library with their own like different functions and things. Like, no one expects you to know that. Like, you
Right.
learn that as you go. But if you know whatever language it is, that's applicable to the job you're applying for, you'll learn the rest of that on the job, and it will just give you that leg up on someone who maybe is less proficient in that area.
Definitely, exactly. It's like someone who wants to learn. It's kind of like when people say, when you learn a third language or a fourth language, is easier because you have learned the second one. Like, you
Exactly.
understand the underlying logic of learning languages, so therefore you have the correct framework, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, you have that mental framework of like, I've learned this one way. It's a lot easier to be like, I'll learn it another way, and then another way, because you're applying those mental skills in different ways, and then kind of bridging some gaps there technically. Like, oh, it worked this way here. I wonder if it works this way here, and so.
Yeah, exactly. Because, even though the languages are different, you can be like, well, they're different, but, they have subjects, they have verbs, they have adjectives, they have grammar, so you can apply the same logic. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and the same with programming, right? Like, you have like, especially like object-oriented programming, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have objects, you have functions, you have all these things.
Function.
They may be called slightly different things in different languages, or they may be, the syntax is going to be different, but like the core idea is there. you can always Google what is this proper syntax for this thing, and you'll find it, right? And as AI becomes more prevalent, like or even just our tools become smarter, like they'll help you through those little things. And as long as you have that foundation, you have that leg up on those who don't.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, I can definitely. I agree with what you're saying. I am a software engineer, and right now I'm like learning C++ because I'm learning on Real Engine, and knowing the basics of programming definitely helps. Definitely
Yeah,
help for
for
sure.
sure.
Yeah, awesome, Jordan. So then, after Blizzard, you went straight to Bungie.
Correct. Yep. So I was working at Blizzard, and then I got a job as a production engineer at Bungie, and worked there for about 2.5 years. And then now I'm kind of looking on to the next thing. I've been working on a small indie project right now. Some people may be familiar with it. The Leap of Faith Studios. I've been helping them with some of their combat design work on Haven, their project. And so that's been fun to work on that. After being in like a proprietary engine at Bungie for a while, it's been fun to dig back into Unreal and working with blueprints and things like that. So it's been good.
How was that transition? Because you're used to working in AAA in the like companies like
Mm-hmm.
Blizzard and Bungie, and now you're working as an indie developer. How was that transition for you?
It's been fun. It's certainly like an adjustment because like you're used to working in like these large projects that a lot of people have contributed to. A lot of them aren't there anymore, so you can't even go ask them, be like, how did you do this thing? But now it's like everyone you're working with has done basically everything that you see in the game. That's not like, pre-baked assets or whatever.
Right.
And so I can be like, hey, what did you do here? And pull it up and be like, it's this and this and this and this and this. And so it's definitely like in some ways better
Mhm.
because you have that direct line in that smaller, more intimate development setting.
Yeah.
So it's been fun to just jump in and start doing stuff. Because especially in those smaller indie situations, you're wearing a lot of hats and trying to
Mhm.
do like lots of different things.
Exactly. There's less bureaucracy for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Direct communication, perfect. When it comes to communication, uh, when you're a game designer, you have to communicate ideas. What's the best way to communicate ideas? Is there like a framework or tool?
Yeah, so and it'll vary depending on like your audience. Like a smaller indie studio setting is going to be different than like a large AAA studio setting. But I would say the thing that remains the same is documentation. And people eyes will glaze over when you start saying that word, but it's very important. And the more on top of it you are, the better a designer you will be, and the more time you'll just save for yourself. Because if you document like your ideas as you're prototyping, as you're designing things, and you keep that up to date, when other people come in and try and understand what it is you're doing, they don't have to just come bug you and waste your time asking all these questions if you've already written down all of that base level stuff that they may be asking you about. And so then they can come to you with more informed questions, or they can get into that experience and know what it is like you're intending there. And so whether you're using something like Confluence, or which is like an Atlassian tool, or Miro, like a Miro board, it doesn't really matter what tool you use. Those are just some of the more common ones. But having a place that's clear and like findable or discoverable so that people know, okay, if I'm looking for this documentation, I can search it in our base or wherever you have it located. And it's easy to find and clearly stated, like, this is my design document or whatever it is that you're writing up. So having that clear and professionally written up and organized is critical. And so practicing that, whether you're in school and you're working on projects, just being organized and how you do things is a very critical skill set to have. And people will put that on their resume, or they'll say, I'm detail oriented, I'm organized and all that. Like, show it as you go through your work, because it's one thing to be able to say that, and it's another thing to be like, I actually like live this skill set in how you work. So very, very key in game development in general is being on top of your own documentation.
Yes, 100%. I also know that Confluence has you can have like a wiki in Confluence and just put all your documents there. So yeah, instead of someone bugging you, they can go ahead and like read whatever it is they need.
Yeah. And that's not to say like you don't want to talk to people about what you're doing, but you want to save them time and you time as you're going through this process, because time is such a valuable resource in game development.
Mhm.
And so if you can save that time by just laying it out for others to see, and honestly, like, you'll forget things. It's inevitable. And so putting all of that there so you can come back and reference on it as you're, jumping around from project to project. Because one thing I didn't quite realize until I was there is like, working at Blizzard is like, these designers that would work on like an encounter or a dungeon or whatever, like, they're working on multiple things at different stages of like the development process at the same time. And so they have to be able to go from, I'm working on this thing that ships next week, and then go work on this thing that ships in like a year, and start, be able to, start and stop these different design focuses, and having documentation to rely on and be like, where did I leave off? Like, what was my initial thought process here?
Mhm.
And not have to like spend all this mental time and energy of like trying to remember what you were
Yes,
doing at that time is, it's such a burden that it relieves from you if you can just write it down.
exactly. Yeah, just delegate your memory to the wiki. You don't have
Hmm.
to keep everything in your brain. Yeah,
Right, exactly.
gotcha, 100%. When it comes to Bungie, how did you get the job at Bungie? Were you referred? Did you just transition from Blizzard to
Kind
Bungie?
of, it was kind of a little bit of luck, I would say. A lot of people that apply there are like, I've been a Bungie fan for a long time. I've always wanted to work there. It's like, I've always enjoyed Bungie games. Like,
Yeah,
I played Halo
Halo.
and played Destiny, but I saw the role and I was just like, I'll just apply. Like, I was still working at Blizzard, was happy at
Mhm.
Blizzard, and I was like, I'll just apply. We'll see. Um, we'll see how that goes. And this was during COVID and everything was still remote, so it was still just kind of this ambiguous time of like, are we going back to the office or not? And
Right.
Bungie had been very like vocal about, we're prioritizing remote work. And so I was like, that sounds appealing to me. So I applied and went through the process and the interview process. And one of the key things that at least I feel like helped me during the interview process was the programming questions and the programming test. And it definitely came up. And so, because as production engineers, we have to interface with the code base on some level, depending on what part of the project we were working on. And so it was a key skill set, and I was glad that I had some programming experience from
Yeah.
school and from working professionally. So it definitely helped carry me through that portion. And then other parts of the interview were maybe more like the softer skill set and the cultural skill set.
Right.
And that's also an equally important part of like applying for studios and finding the right environment that's right for you, because not only are they interviewing you, you're interviewing them. So that
Exactly.
that to like turn the coin and go from the technical to the soft side, like that part is still very, very important, not equally important.
Exactly. 100%. Yep. Currently, are you looking for any new positions in the industry? Do you want to start your own thing? What's next for you?
Yeah, I've definitely been looking for other opportunities, whether it's in design or engineering or somewhere in between, like production. Um, and so I've definitely been applying for positions in that space. And then, as I mentioned, in the meantime, I've been working in that new indie studio that Robert and Monday have founded. Leap of Faith Studios, so it's been fun to see all of their work now kind of coming to light and having a demo on Steam. It's been really cool to just jump in there and be like, wow, there's a lot here. This is exciting to now be a part of for however long I'm working.
Yeah, 100%. And if you guys are interested in Leap of Faith, we actually have an episode with Monday and an episode with Robert. He talks about gameplay loops, and then Robert talks about the more like the business side of the industry, like coaching, leadership. So we're going to have the links below as well. Awesome, Jordan. Let's talk about version control. It's something that not a lot of people know of, but it's so important in the engineering process.
It is. And I can't tell you how many times I've worked with a designer, an artist, or any developer, and they seem very timid or afraid of the version control process or feel like they're going to break something. And the good news is it's there so if you break something, it's not a big deal. It is your safety net. So a lot of studios will have their own, ways they do things, different types of version control setups and whatnot. But everyone should assume, if they don't, like, there's a problem, should have some form of version control, be that Git or Perforce or SVN or what have you. There are lots of different types. My biggest advice to you is just use version control. It doesn't matter so much what kind. Git is free, it's easy to use for the most part, and it's very commonly used for not just engineering, but multiple disciplines.
Sure.
And so just use it. Become comfortable with that process of checking things in and branching your content and then, re-merging. Like those simple steps of like marking something for add, marking something for delete. Like those things that sound scary, like it's just creating a history of what you have done and a way to either go back to it, recover it, or merge it into someone else's work.
Exactly.
And merging always comes up as like the really scary one. It's like, oh, I have a collision here, right? Like, that's bad. Well, not always. A lot of the time it's just like you worked on something that referenced the same thing as them, and you just need to pick which version of that is the most like relevant, the most up to date. And when you break it down like that, it's not as scary, but people will still throw their hands in the air and say, help, I broke something, I don't know what to do. And really it's just you looking at two versions of the same file and saying, I want this one.
Exactly.
So not to go on too much of a rant on version control, but it's so important that people aren't afraid of it. Like, it's fine if you're not an expert and don't know all the fancy commands. Like, there are people who specialize in that, and that's fine. And if you love doing that, you can go get a job doing that. But just being comfortable with working in that framework and that workflow where you're checking stuff in, you're checking stuff out, you're working in this collaborative environment, especially where we work in a remote world a lot of the time now. Being able to do these things asynchronously is so critical. You have to be able to know how these version control systems work, if nothing else at a base level, and be comfortable doing that. So if you're going through school or you're working on your own projects, just use it. Even if it's just use it, because you're getting into that habit of working with these tools, whether it's GitHub or some other thing. Just use it. Get comfortable with it.
Yes. It's so important. It facilitates teamwork, and then you have multiple branches. You can work on different things at the same time. It's so important. Guys, please learn version control. I recommend Git. I always use GitHub. Do you recommend something else, Jordan? Do you know anything else?
GitHub is probably the easiest for people to just get in and start using it. But I've used various ones at previous places. At Bungie, we used Perforce.
Hmm.
At Blizzard, they use multiple different services.
Okay.
And I don't actually remember which one WoW used because I wasn't really checking in content
No worries.
as a QA analyst. But and then we used SVN when I was working as a software developer. So it really doesn't matter which one you'd use. Just pick one and get started.
Exactly. And
If
also,
you aren't already.
exactly, if you're like a junior engineer, it's gonna be very difficult for you to break something because you don't have the power to merge stuff into the code. So your manager will look at it, they will give you like, hey, please fix this, fix that. And you're not gonna delete the whole project. There's a lot of things preventing that from happening. So yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of safeguards usually, especially for newer folks who are still learning the process and all of that. And even still, like most admins should be able to back things up and
Mhm.
fix that, even if you do manage to break something. And the best part is, if that does happen, you learn and you know, like you will become very intimately familiar with how not to do that again,
Oh yeah.
because you'll feel more embarrassed than anybody else. Like they'll be like, "It's okay, like it's why it's here." But it's not just a safety net, right? Like it's a way to control like who works on what and prevent
Hmm.
people.
Hmm.
It's not just to like save you when you do mess up. It's to prevent those collisions that
Those conflicts, yeah.
would be a lot of work to try and unravel, right? So it's not scary. It shouldn't be scary. So just get in there and do it.
Yeah, go ahead and make mistakes. If anything, if something is not working, just stash your changes. Don't push it. Just stash it and then ask
Mhm.
questions. Yeah. Git stash, easy command.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. It's stash and get perforce. It's like shelve or something. Yeah,
Yeah.
same concept.
It's what we're talking about with like the programming languages and such. It's a different like syntax, I guess, but the purpose is the same.
Mhm.
Yeah. Awesome, perfect. Jordan, one more thing. Okay, so you were talking about, okay, it's important to be a game designer, have all these skills, but also kind of like supplement it with a technical skill. So that technical skill can be engineering, can be art.
Yeah, well, and like game dev is such a collaborative process, right? You're going to be working with different disciplines, not just design, but engineering, as you mentioned, art, technical art, production. In larger settings, you'll have like a producer that's working with you to keep you and your team on track and meeting certain milestones. Also, like QA is such a critical discipline in game development. It doesn't get enough recognition or compensation for all the work they do. And so being able to work with these different disciplines in their own spaces and at least being familiar with what kinds of things are they prioritizing, what kinds of skill sets are they coming into this process with, and like being able to utilize that because they know you're a designer, they know the kinds of work you're involved with a lot of the time, and so knowing what kind of workflows they deal with on a day-to-day basis, even if it just at like a base level, is really important. So like QA, they're often testing things whether manually or through automation, or writing up test plans and working through identifying ways to mitigate bugs or writing bugs and then passing those along is super important because then you know what to expect from them when you go and approach, say, like a QA person and saying like, I have this idea, um, and they're coming at you with like, okay, well, it would require this test plan
Mm.
or this thing to like break it or
Hmm.
whatever. Like, and we would need these resources to test that to make sure it's gonna, be at the quality bar that the designer would want it to be. Because you should be testing your content, but especially in a AAA setting, like there are so many interconnecting pieces. Like one thing you do affects everybody or affects a lot of things. And so being able to have these systems in place to catch that is important. Same with engineering, right? Like you may be working on some project and you need some new feature or some new implementation that's just not already there. Knowing what the engineers are working with and how to approach them with that kind of request is super important, because you don't just want to shoot a request email or whatever into the ether. It may not be worked on in time for whatever it is you're requesting.
Mhm.
So just being familiar with their workflows, being familiar with what they are involved with is also important there. And then same with art. Like you don't just say, hey, I have this really cool boss idea, make it look cool for me.
Yeah.
You got to know what these artists are working with, the tool sets
Right.
they're working with, and maybe I'll use the example of like a raid in WoW, right? Say you have like this idea for a boss, but it fits not like doesn't fit at all with like the aesthetic or the theme that raid may be involved with. Like just knowing like what's the color palette like supposed to be like going into this experience, right? Like fitting those themes, like knowing where your fellow developers are at and like what they're working on and their focus is, just gives you so much more context and helps you be more successful in your own job when it comes down to like coming up with a cool experience to design for people. If you know what the QA analysts are going to be doing on their side and what the engineers can provide on their side and what your artists and so forth, like what all they're expecting, it helps you know what's expected of you and be able to perform at your best.
Gotcha. And also, when you worked in Bungie as a production engineer, from what I've heard before, it's a support role, and you helped multiple teams. And I imagine that helped,
Correct.
knowing what their job looks like, how to talk to them, how to specify a request.
Absolutely. That was basically like the core of my job is working with everyone and being able to kind of divide those lines. And you talk to engineers differently than you do artists because
Yes.
they understand things differently than artists do. And that's not to say either one is better than the other. It's just they're coming at it from a different perspective, and so they value things and prioritize things differently. Because engineers are thinking like, okay, we have this major milestone coming up. We have all of these features and bugs and things we need to have ready to ship. And artists are like, I have this big, deadline that I need to have this entire space filled out and polished, and they're trying not to like run into crashes or
Mm.
issues with their tools. So each of them care about things differently, but knowing what they prioritize and how to best help them is critical to was critical at least as a production engineer, but I would say is valuable for anyone working in that collaborative setting because you're all on a team, we're all trying to work together to make this game, and so it's just good to know where everyone kind of fits in that giant family of a
Exactly.
development environment.
Exactly. Would you say that isolation in the gaming industry, kind of like isolating yourself, working on your thing, and not being aware of what other people are doing or how they do things, that would be a bad thing. That would be detrimental.
Definitely if you're working in a team setting, absolutely. And hopefully like your producer would be on top of you, keeping you from getting too much like too isolated in that
Right.
setting. Uh but if you're working like an indie setting, it's definitely very easy to just be like, I'm working on my
Yeah.
stuff, kind of putting the blinders on and just not really
Yeah.
thinking about how what you do impacts other people. But it's definitely dangerous to have that isolationist mindset. So
Yeah.
tread
100%.
cautiously.
Tread cautiously. Awesome. Currently, what games are you playing at the moment?
So as far as like video games, I still play World of Warcraft a good bit.
Okay.
Not nearly as much as I used to. I just don't have as much time to dedicate. I used to be, mythic rating and all of that, and I retired Dragonflight from mythic rating, but I still play casually with friends. I still play old school RuneScape as well, which is fun.
Oh, that's a classic.
Yeah, I actually maxed my main account a few months ago, so I got 277. Everything's 99, so that was fun.
Wow.
Been working on an Iron Man account kind of on the side. Play it that less than I used to now as well, and then I've also been playing the One Piece trading card game. Actually, it's been really
Let's
fun.
go. Me too.
So yeah, so I've really enjoyed playing that. I picked that up a couple months ago because I used to play Hearthstone and Magic and all those quite a bit, and so it's been a fun game. I really enjoy it, and I love the anime, so it's great.
Heck yeah, One Piece all the way. Well, you guys can see my straw hat right there. Awesome, Jordan. Jordan, where can people find you? Where can people talk to you, contact you?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way is probably either on like LinkedIn or Twitter. It's just Jordan Runyan. It's pretty easy to find me on there. Yeah, my DMs are technically open, I suppose. Like if you
Yeah.
wanted to shoot me a message, if you just send me a connection and I have no idea who you are, I would probably say no, because that's a great way to not actually make connections. Just shooting them to everybody you can.
Exactly.
Reach out to people. Like there's a real person on the other side of that. So,
Mhm.
like, introduce yourself. Tell them why they should hit accept instead of ignore.
Exactly. Especially if you guys have like no connections in common. It's weird.
Right. Or even if you do, it's like, cool, you know people I used to work with. I don't know you. So tell me why I should know who you are. Or if I do know you or we used to work together, like, just say something.
Exactly. Yeah, guys, if you when you network, please be intentional with your networking. Be intentional, send a message, have a clear goal. Yeah, I agree with you, Jordan. Awesome. Yeah, and if you are a potential employer, an investor or someone, Jordan is a very awesome professional. I really like the fact that he is someone who understands game design from a holistic perspective, but also from a technical perspective. And as you mentioned before, that's extremely valuable. So I'm pretty sure you have elevated every single project you've been in, for sure.
Hope so.
I think so. Awesome. Yeah. So yeah, that's it for today. Then Jordan, thank you so much for coming to the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All
It's
right,
been
guys.